my first chance to speak in this church, St. Mary Church. Only about a month had passed by then, since Russia escalated its aggression against Ukraine. At the time, the first reactions to the war were those of shock. The world is still being shocked every day by the Russian barbarity, but for many of us, including myself, the shock has become numb. At the same time, 1 year later, we can better reflect theologically on the war and its motives. We are going to do this in our conference, and as a prelude to the conference, I'd like to briefly reflect on this. My sermon is not typical. It's not about spiritual edifying, for which I apologize. It's more similar to a very specific genre in my own tradition, a genre which is practiced very rarely, actually during the Lent only. I personally never practice it myself. It's a sort of a genre of anathematisms. I'm not going to proclaim anathemas right now, but I'm going to think and reflect in this spirit about how my own tradition has been taken hostage, has been distorted, which is a lesson for all Christian traditions, I believe. It is quite obvious that what is propagated as the reasons for starting and continuing this war are in fact pretexts for an unspoken agenda. The true reasons are usually not admitted or articulated publicly. It is our task as theologians and scholars in other disciplines to expose them. These reasons include an unbridled post-Soviet revanchism, the megalomaniac idea of superiority, and the urgent necessity to preserve autocracy and kleptocracy in Russia, which serve the privileged few. Nonetheless, what Vladimir Putin and his media propagate as the war's reasons, along with his other mouthpieces, including, unfortunately, those among the church figures, hierarchs, and theologians, are in fact its pretexts, because it is precisely that which they claim to protect that in reality suffers most from the Russian invasion. So let me first say a few words about the first pretext, which is protecting Christianity. Protecting Christianity became one of the pretexts of the war. The propagandists already used this narrative of protecting a Christian minority in the Middle East when the Russian airplanes bombarded Aleppo and other cities in Syria. Many Christians died then, along with many Muslims. The two religious groups, as a result, became alienated even further. Something similar is happening in Ukraine, where Putin claims to be protecting the Russian Orthodox Church. In fact, however, most churches and religious sites destroyed in the war belong to the Moscow Patriarchate. Even those members of the Moscow Patriarchate who were Putin's supporters fall prey to the aggression and that he has unleashed. I personally knew a priest, for example, Father Vladimir Bormashev, who was a zealous Russian patriot. He was a professor at the Kiev Theological Academy, where I studied as well. And he was also a priest in a community in Irpin. In the first days of the invasion, he tried to escape the bombardments. Like many others, he couldn't, and he was hit by a Russian shell. He died from his wounds in March 2022. I don't mention this case to point out that proponents of the Russian world, the so-called Russian world, have unwittingly reaped what they sowed. I want to say that Putin tends repeatedly to destroy everything and everyone he claims to care about. This also applies to the second pretext of the war I wanted to mention, the so-called traditional values. Putin has weaponized the notion of the traditional values. As with his other weapons in his corrupt and dysfunctional armies, this intended weapon of Russia's supposed traditional values has been discredited. Indeed, which of these values have not been violated by the troops of the aggressor? Let me briefly assess this violation against the Ten Commandments. The first three commandments: thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. The Russian world is about worshipping this world. It places fatherland before the father. Putin himself suggested this when he addressed the crowd in Moscow on February 22 this year. With reference to the fatherland, he claimed that this word, I quote, features something powerful, huge, I would say mystical and holy. It's not a coincidence that one of the most known prayers begins with Our Father. The Russian world worships the fatherland and is based on what is called political religion. This is a sort of religion that substitutes religion proper with ideologies and acts coercively. All political religions are coercive and idolatrous. The deities worshipped in the political religion of the Russian world are particularly bloodthirsty, demanding even more human sacrifices, both of Russia's neighbors and of Russians themselves. The fourth commandment: remember Sabbath day to keep it holy. Before Christmas this year, the Patriarch of Moscow, Kirill, and Vladimir Putin came up with an initiative to cease fire to celebrate the Nativity of the Lord. This initiative was hypocritical per se, as if it is all right to kill when it is not Christmas or other holiday. However, the Russian troops did not stop killing even on those days. They shelled mines on January 7th, when the Orthodox in Russia and Ukraine celebrated the Nativity, and killed at least one civilian in the Kharkiv region. The fifth commandment: honor thy father and thy mother. A part of the mythology that Putin propagates refers to Kyiv as the mother of the Russian cities. He dishonors Kyiv and many other cities and villages in Ukraine by besieging, bombarding, and destroying them. Thou shalt not kill. According to the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the war that Putin started has claimed over 3,000 civilian casualties only in 2014-2015. I'm not talking about this escalation of the war. And over 8,000 after the war escalated in February 22. These casualties include about 500 children. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Adultery became an intrinsic part of Putin's war. In the words of the UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence, Pamela Patton, when women are held for days and raped, when you start to rape little boys and men, when you see a series of genital mutilations, when you hear women testify about Russian soldiers equipped with Viagra, it's clearly a military strategy. She added, and when the victims report what was said during the rapes, it is clearly a deliberate tactic to dehumanize the victims. According to Pamela Patton's office, more than 100 cases of rape or sexual assault have been registered since February 2022. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, in her words. The age of the victims varies from 4 to 82 years old. They are mostly women and girls, but also men and boys. Thou shalt not steal. In this war, both the Russian state and its soldiers steal on a gigantic scale. The state steals everything from children to grain. Over 16,000 children have been deported, or in other words, stolen from Ukraine by Russia. Many of them were separated from their parents without their consent. For this reason, the International Criminal Court issued on March 17th an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin and the Commissioner for Children's Rights in the office of the Russian President Maria Lvova-Belova. While the Russian state steals on a national scale, its soldiers do the same at the level of households. They loot them and steal from them everything they can carry, from washing machines to toilets. One hopes there will be justice served for such cases as well. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. The war is driven by false witness presented by Russian propaganda. In 2014, the central state-sponsored Russian TV channels broadcasted a story about a 3-year-old boy who was allegedly crucified by the Ukrainian troops. who regained the eastern city of Slavyansk after its short Russian occupation. This story caused outrage in the Russian society, but was later proven as completely fabricated. In 2022, the Russian aggression escalated on the basis of another false witness about the Ukrainian troops allegedly preparing to invade Russia. Every aspect of this war is driven by false witnesses, which bluntly violate God's commandment. This reminds me of another scriptural dictum. You are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. In this dictum, murder and lies are intrinsically connected, as they are in Russia's war against Ukraine. And finally, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. As of March 2023, the Office of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine has registered about 75,000 crimes that violate this commandment. This is only a part of all violations committed. As the war continues, tragically, there will be more crimes against humanity and individual human beings in Ukraine. One hopes justice will be eventually served for all of them. I would conclude my anathematisms with a final charge against Putin of distorting the tradition that he pretends to protect and associates himself with. The more he struggles to explain the war to himself and to the Russian people rationally, the more he develops irrational arguments. One would call them theological, but they have nothing to do with theology. These arguments distort the tradition. This is an example, a very short example. In his speech delivered on the occasion of the war's anniversary on February 21, he addressed the debates within the Anglican Communion regarding what kind of language should be used for God. He gave his own theological, so to say, answer to the question raised in these debates. He said, and I quote, "The Anglican Church is considering a gender-neutral God. May God forgive them, for they know not what they do." Maybe his intention was different, but what he actually did was to affirm that God has gender. This statement is as clumsy as the one Putin made on other occasions on which he stated that Orthodox Christianity is closer to Islam than to the Western Christian traditions. Even Joseph Stalin, who studied theology in a seminary and had opinions about many fields of knowledge, did not utter a single one on theology. Putin, as distinct from Stalin, did not study theology but follows Stalin in his role model, and yet does not hesitate to opine on theological matters. His sort of service to theology and the Orthodox tradition is as destructive as his rapacious service to Russia and its long-suffering neighbors. When I studied homiletics in seminary in Kiev, I was taught that I need to conclude my sermon with a moral lesson. So that is my moral lesson. It's always a distortion of Christianity, of tradition, when it becomes politicized, when it becomes instrumentalized and weaponized for any political goal. Let us stay away from this. Let us learn this very grave lesson. Amen.